morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a little bit of a look at the latest installment of the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game. We have made it all the way up to EX Dragon, the third of the EX series that started up after Wizards of the Coast had to give the game back to the Pokemon Company. Do make sure you spam that like button, please. Make sure you let me know these videos are appreciated and need to carry on. Now, this was released in Japan on June the 25th, 2003. It made its way over to US, Europe, etc. Got released in English, so to speak, on November the 24th, 2003. And the name's not for nothing. This is a set that brought the Generation 3 Dragon Pokemon into the Pokemon trading card game. So, for instance, we saw the debut of Flygon. Worth pointing out that there were actually two different Flygon in the set, which is quite nice. We saw the debut of Salamence, and again, worth pointing out there were two different Salamence that came around in the set, both of which had abilities that was kind of cool. We saw the debut of Altaria, who unfortunately only got one print. Boo, hiss, etc. But we did also get some EXs as well. We saw Latias and Latios make their debuts as EXs, and we also saw Dragonite EX, that was the only dragon we actually had back in Gen 1. Beautiful artwork on that card, incidentally. Now, the other thing this set did was it brought in colourless as a weakness. Because, you see, we needed to do something about these dragon Pokemon. If we go back to the base set, and remember in the base set, all we had was Dragonite, though it took Fossil to actually get a Dragonite, we only had up to Dragonair in the base set. No weakness, resistance to fighting. And essentially, after a while, that gets a little bit powerful. We needed to do something about this, so we brought them in with colourless weaknesses. Now, shout out to Dragonite EX that had one weakness but two resistances to grass and to fighting. And we saw a very similar thing with Latios and Latias, weak to colourless, but both had two resistances. Latios with grass and fighting, Latias with psychic and fighting. Worth pointing out that they weren't all weak to colourless. The non-holo Salamence and the non-holo Flygon both had no weakness still, but some of them did. The holo ones did have a weakness to colourless there. It was the first time we'd seen a colourless weakness. Now, one of the things that was really interesting to me in this set was that we actually had proper job secret rares. So there were officially 97 cards in the set, but we had number 98 Charmander, 99 Charmeleon, and 100 Charizard. They were holo rares that actually had a number above the set name. This is a very standard thing nowadays. It wasn't always back in the day. And they were new cards. This was a brand new Charizard that hadn't been revealed before, and the only way to get it was in EX Dragon. Though it is very much worth pointing out that these did later become the promos for tournaments. So you got the Charmander for going to a city championship, the Charmeleon for going to a state championship, and you got the Charizard for going to a national championship. Although they did end up being rarer and more expensive than the secret rares in the set. Now, what was very interesting was that for the second set in a row, we technically had some cards before Japan did. There was a Latios and Latias gift box that had a bunch of the cards from this set in it in Japan, including Latios and Latias EX, that was technically released before EX Dragon, but because we had pre-releases a couple weeks before the release of EX Dragon, those cards actually made it out over here earlier than they made it out in Japan. Now, pre-release promos, as I mentioned last week, were a proper thing by this stage, and Gyarados was your pre-release promo of choice. That's the one you got. Lovely. I have little else to say about that. In terms of the most expensive card, you probably shouldn't be surprised to hear it was a secret rare Charizard. Comes in at $100. You'd probably pay about double that for the Nationals promo. The Gyarados pre-release promo does come in at about $80. And then Dragonite EX is probably the most expensive of the, quote, real cards in the set, which comes in somewhere around the $40 mark. You should be able to pick it up for that. And like we've done in the other sets, I suppose it's worth counting down all of the EXs that we did get in the set. So we did get ourselves an Ampharos EX. Do very much like the Pokebody that makes your opponent take a damage counter when they attach an energy. The aforementioned Dragonite EX that wasn't terribly great in terms of playability, but it was very, very nice in terms of value, because Dragonite is a very popular Pokemon. Golem EX was one of only 2 of the EXs in the set that actually had a double weakness. You'll notice Ampharos was a stage 2, but only had a single weakness. And Kingdra EX was the other one that had double weakness. Grass and lightning. It is very interesting to note that it's got that genetic memory attack, lets it use any attacks from the basic or stage 1 card. That was actually one of the reasons why the Kingdra from Neo Revelation, probably the main reason, was actually a good playable card. So it was nice to see that coming back. We also saw ourselves an EX for Latias and Latios, as we mentioned earlier. Neither of them particularly amazing, but they could both do 100 damage, which was quite cool. We got ourselves a Macago EX, which might look kind of similar to people playing more recently. And we saw Muck EX that was far and away, as we'll see in a moment, the best and most playable of them in terms of seeing tournament success. And then we saw ourselves a Rayquaza, which could do a phenomenal amount of damage if you could get a phenomenal amount of energy on it. And who knows, maybe you just flip 20 head to a Spiral Growth, and then you get to attach 20 energy from your discard pile. Now moving on into the theme decks, obviously they were dragon themed, be a bit of a waste if they weren't. Fire Fang was a fire water deck with Salamence on the cover, and you did get yourself 2 rare Salamence as well as a Hollow Crawdaunt. Worth pointing out as well that you did get a Salamence coin here, which was beautiful. And I probably should have mentioned a couple weeks ago, coins before the EX era, i.e. when Wizards were still making the game, are not legal for tournament play. But as it stands at the moment, all coins from EX, Ruby and Sapphire onwards are, so these coins I'm showing you are still legal for tournament play in 2020. The other theme deck was Wind Blast, a grass lightning deck with Flygon on the cover, and you got yourself 2 Flygon as well as a Hollow Roselia. And yes, there was a beautiful Flygon coin that you got as well, if that's what you're into. And although this was a dragon-focused set, it is very much worth pointing out that we didn't actually get proper dragon-type Pokemon until Dragons Exalted dropped in August 2012. And also worth pointing out, I've done a couple videos about this, although I still get questions on a daily basis. It looks like Dragon Pokemon may be done. We've still not seen any Dragon Pokemon in the Sword and Shield expansions, and we've seen quite a few cards from Sword and Shield so far. Of course, you might be watching this 5-10 years down the line and Dragon Pokemon are good and healthy, in which case, just forget I said anything. Now, in terms of the best cards, there were a couple of the EX era sets that were absolutely huge and made a gigantic impact on the competitive side of the Pokemon trading card game. This wasn't one of them. But there were a couple of cards that were very, very relevant. And like we did last week, and like we're going to do moving forward, we're going to clock which of these cards made themselves into World's winning cards, got into World's winning decks. Now, in terms of Pokemon, the biggest, bestest, most impactful Pokemon in the entire set was Magneton. Now, there were 2 Magneton in the set. One of them sucked, but one of them didn't. And the reason it didn't suck was the Pokepower Magnetic Field. Once during your turn, if you have basic energy cards in your discard pile, you may discard 1 card from your hand and then search your discard pile for 2 basic energy and put them into your hand. It was a way of recovering energy from your discard pile. This is a very good thing. It also had an attack that did 10 damage for each energy attached to all of your Pokemon. So if you were playing lightning energy or a special energy that would count, and there was enough energy on the field, yes. But any decks that were accelerating from the hand or really relied on lots of energy, this was a very, very good thing. And it made its way into a couple of Worlds winning decks. It was featured in Rocky Beach, as well as being featured in Team Rushdown. How cool. In terms of other competitive Pokemon, Muck EX did see some play. Now, I don't think I can tell you that Muck EX was an absolute powerhouse, but I can tell you that it saw a little bit of play and a little bit of love. A decent amount of play. And the reason was the Pokebody Toxic Gas. As long as Muck EX is your active Pokemon, ignore all Pokepowers and Pokebodies other than Toxic Gas. Now, this did actually get a lot better when Legend Maker dropped, and we got the Grimer with Ascension. The Grimer with Ascension for 1 grass energy let you search your deck for a card that evolves from Grimer and put it onto Grimer. So essentially your goal here would be win the flip, go first, and then use Ascension to evolve into Muck EX as your turn ended, locking your opponent out of Pokepowers and Pokebodies for literally the entire game. The attacks on Muck EX were nothing particularly great. 1 grass energy, 10 damage plus poison. 2 grass and a colorless, 40 damage plus 10 more for each energy in the defending Pokemon's retreat cost. They were not particularly inspiring, but the real point of Muck was that it didn't matter how good your attacks were, you were shutting down your opponent's deck to the point where they couldn't get set up, so even underwhelming attacks, that would do quite nicely. There were a couple of supporters, however, that really were awesome and did see a lot of play in a lot of decks. TV Reporter is one we've had more recently, and it lets you draw 3 cards, then discard any 1 card from your hand. It's not phenomenal compared to a lot of supporters we've had since, but it was one of the best options at the time. It was played in the Magma Spirit deck that won Worlds, it was played in Bright Aura, and it was played in Mewtrick, and Mewtrick was another deck that literally won the World Championships. And when it finds its way into the World Championship, the actual Masters winning deck of 2004 and 2006, it might be time to realise it was actually a really good card at the time. The other one was Mr. Briney's Compassion. Now, Mr. Briney's Compassion, I mean, first of all, phenomenal artwork. But you chose one of your Pokemon in play that wasn't a Pokemon EX, and you returned that Pokemon and all cards attached to it to your hand. And it was really good for things like the Milotic, which was featured very heavily in the Queendom World's winning deck. Milotic, basically when you played it, you got to remove all damage counters from all of your Pokemon and your opponents, other than EXs. So it was really good for being able to reuse those kind of abilities. Also made its way into the Magma Spirit deck that we will be learning a lot more about next week when we finally get our way to EX Team Magma versus Team Aqua. Then there were a couple of other cards that are worth pointing out. Energy Recycle System is a card that's actually legal nowadays and alright. You got 1 basic energy into your hand or 3 basic energy into your deck. It was alright in terms of energy recovery, though not one of the best cards in the format. Mareep. The Mareep was actually the best option for Dark Flaffy decks that would come later. 1 colorless energy, paralysis on a coin flip. Not an amazing card, but I've seen a bunch of lists for Dark Flaff and they all played this Mareep. And given that there's only 2 really good Pokemon in the set, I thought Mareep was worth a shout out. And there was a pair of cards that made a very fun rogue deck at the time. And they are very much a pair. It's Ninjask and Shedinja. Now, these weren't really some powerhouse deck that was ruling the format, but they did work very nicely as a pair. Ninjask for 2 colorless energy did 30 damage, and you got to switch with one of your bench Pokemon, and then move grass energy to it if you wanted to. And then Shedinja had the Pokebody Wonder Guard that prevented all effective attacks, including damage, done to Shedinja by your opponent's evolved Pokemon and Pokemon EX. Shedinja had 30 HP. Shedinja always has terrible HP. It goes with the territory in the game. But it was very, very difficult to KO Shedinja because you had to use a basic non-EX Pokemon, which was not the easiest thing to do. For one colorless energy, you put one damage counter plus one more for each damage counter on Shedinja on the defending Pokemon. Nobody really cares about that. You hit and run with Ninjask while just stopping your opponent attacking with Shedinja. And you did have the Pokepower Loose Shell on Ninjask. Once during your turn, when you play Ninjask from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may search your deck for Shedinja and put it on your bench and treat it as a basic Pokemon. So you could even cheat Shedinja into play, which was important because they both evolve from Nincada, and you can only play 4 Nincada, so nice to be able to cheat Shedinja into play. Now, in terms of top decks, there really were not many decks that made a big impact on the format. Probably the best deck that came out from this was Muck EX. And you'll find a bunch of lists floating around the internet. I know Jason Kozinski's blog's got a very nice one. Good site to use for research. As is Bulbapedia, incidentally, where I always go and have a gander when I'm doing these history videos. And really, Muck EX was a deck in and of itself. Ascension Grimer, get Muck EX out and go. There were plenty of other cards you could play with it, and like I said, you'll find some lists playing other stuff, but it really was a Muck EX deck. Now, there were plenty of other things you could play with it. Team Aqua's Hideout was a very nice stadium you might want to play to increase the retreat cost of non-Team Aqua Pokemon, stick your opponent in the active while they're not using any Poke Powers. And remember, you did poison, so that was fun. If you didn't want that, you could play around with Crystal Beach, which said each special energy that provides 2 or more energy, and there were a bunch back then, now provides only 1 colorless energy. Yeah, that could slow down some decks, bearing in mind slowing down decks is what you were looking for. Energy Removal 2 was a very good one, because, well, it just got rid of energy on a coin flip. You'd rather it wasn't on a coin flip, but as we've talked about, we'd move the game on at this stage. And then Pokemon Reversal that gusted up one of your opponent's Pokemon on a coin flip was a pretty good deal. One of the things you need to bear in mind with Muck was that the ability only worked in the active, so one of the ways to play this was literally play it as a quad deck, making sure your active is Muck, and all of your bench Pokemon are Muck, so that even if your opponent has got one of these cards that can gust a bench Pokemon up, all they can gust up is Muck, and they still don't get their abilities back. Or Pokepowers and Pokebodies, as they were back then. The only other real deck that came from this set was Ninjask and Shedinja. We've talked about it, they did just work as a pair. If you're playing the deck, might I be so bold as to suggest Vileplume EX? Because if Vileplume EX is in play, your opponent cannot play any trainer cards other than supporters from his or her hand. It fits the grass energy theme the other Pokemon are using, and it does give you a potential out against decks that don't rely on Poke Powers and Pokebodies. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen, that was EX Dragon. A very cool set for bringing in all those dragon Pokemon, bringing in colourless weakness, giving us a lovely secret rare Charizard, not to mention debuting Baby Daisy Spirit Pokemon. Not the most impactful set in terms of the competitive landscape, but it did give us a couple of cards that were pretty gosh darned good. For now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to hear from you guys, after you've spammed that like button, of course. I would like to know if you were playing back then, what your memories were, what decks you played, what your favourite cards were, or if you're just hearing about this set for the first time now, what cards, decks, etc. that I've talked about in this video have piqued your interest. Go nuts in the comment section, but please remember the rule. Be nice, would ya? And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where you can find out about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but are pretty gosh darned awesome nonetheless. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.